Okay, so Zoom looks a little bit different, but I think I'm sharing my screen, so I should be good to go. All right, so we're going to get started on our Java swing. No, and that is not the right document. Let me fix that. I'm not sure how that happened. All right, so what I have is I have a document that I created. And the first thing you're going to see in the document is a PDF of the lesson. It's called the Java Swing text or PDF, whatever you want to call it. So I'm going to have that open quite a bit along with JGrass. So this is where we're going to start. All right. So computer programs are more user-friendly when they contain a graphical user interface that has components such as buttons and text fields in which the user can interact with the program. Now, historically, Java contains several sets of pre-written GUI components. These include something called the AWT, the Abstract Window Toolkit. So this was the first of it. This happened first, whose components are older and not as portable as the newer frameworks. We are going to work with Java Swing. So it's a more advanced set of GUI elements, such as dialog boxes and buttons, that is newer and more portable than this old set. And their names usually begin with J, like J label, J button, J text field, etc. Now, Java FX is even newer, and that's the focus of chapter 15. We're not going to do that because it can be very fussy. If you've got a Chromebook, you can't really use it. So that's why I opted just to do with Java Swing. But if you learn Java Swing, you can learn Java FX, just some minor tweaks. So in the AWT, the components have simple names such as frame and button. But in Swing, everything has a J in front of it. Now, GUI components are also called controls or widgets. Each Swing component is a descendant of J component, which inherits from Java AWT container class. So you're going to need to insert this statement, import java.swing at the beginning of your Java program so that you can take advantage of all the Swing components. The X in JavaX originally stood for extension, so named because the Swing classes were an extension of the original Java specifications. All right. Now I'm not going to read everything, but and I know you don't really want me to. So when you use Swing components, you place them in something called a container. So a container is like a bucket that holds other components so that can be treated as a single entity. So we're going to have this container, and in the container, we're going to put a frame. And then inside the frame, we're going to add buttons and text fields and things of that nature. So containers have a special class called the container class, and often a container takes the form of a window that you can drag, resize, minimize, restore, and close. So that's what we're going to be doing. We're going to be writing applications that pop open a window, and we're going to interact with it. So we're going to be doing a lot of inheriting along the way. So the container class is a parent class, and the window class is a child of container. So a window, a pop-up window, is a rectangular container that holds GUI components. But most programmers in Java prefer to create a frame instead of a window. So a frame is a GUI component similar to a window, but has a title bar and a border. And that's what we're going to start working with in the next lesson. So here we're going to start with the JFrame class. So you create a JFrame so you can place other objects within it for display. So this shows the inheritance tree of JFrame. Now remember, everything starts from the object class and it is defined in java.lang, which you get every time that you write a Java program. but not all things underneath this are inherited automatically with the language. So that's why we have to use import statements. So you can see J-frame is a descendant of frame, which is a descendant of window, which is a descendant of container, which is a descendant of component, which is um, a child of object. Now, so to make a J-frame, there are 4 different constructors available. One that takes nothing, so the frame is invisible and has no title. One that takes a string title and creates an invisible J-frame, so no border, with a title. This J-frame with this graphics configuration is a specified graphics configuration of a screen device with a blank title. You will learn about this as you continue on your study in Java. And then you have one constructor that has both of those items. So we're just going to pretty much stick with this basic one, which is going to give us a title on our frame. And the format is just like constructing or instantiating any other object. You say the name of the class, you give it a reference variable equals a new name of the class, and then you put inside of here whatever the constructor is asking you for. Now, once you create the J-frame object, you can now use a bunch of methods that you get within the J-frame class. Set the title of the frame, set the size of the frame, its width and height in pixels. There's also something called a dimension class that you could do the same thing with, but we're not going to use that. You have an accessor method for the title. Set resizable, and you'll set this to true or false. So this will give you the ability to drag the window bigger or not. This is like an accessor method. Is it resizable? This ends up being one of the most important commands because you can make a frame and put stuff in it, but if you don't make it visible, it's not going to show up. And those are the ones we are going to use for the most part. Now that's only a small portion of what's available in the J-frame class, and of course you can go to the Java API if you want to learn more about it. Now, we're going to start with a very simple program that is going to create our very first frame. We're going to set the size, and then we are going to make the frame visible. So again, you create a J-frame object, you set the size, you make it visible. So I have coded that already. And I'm going to be doing some switching around. I'm sorry about that. I just want to see. Okay. So you have to have this import statement at the top. And let's see what happens when we run it. So you get a frame. Notice that this string appears at the top. I've set a size and I've made it visible. So if I make a change like this, it's gonna change the size of the frame. So it's always width, comma, height. Now, going back to our document, that's your, you're gonna make that and replicate. The application in the figure 14.2 produces the J-frame, just like this one. So it's similar to other frames that you have seen. Let's keep going on. Now, in the application in figure 14.2, which is what we just did, all 3 statements in the main method are important. You will not see the frame if you do not set visible to true. And if the frame is 0 by 0, if you don't give it a dimension, it's not going to show up either because it will be by default 0 by 0 in size. Now, let's go back and let's run this again. So I'm going to close it. and watch what happens. Nothing happens. The window just closes. So that's a little, I don't want to say frustrating, but that's kind of an important concept. You can control what happens when you close out the window. Um, let's see. When a user closes a J-frame by clicking the close button in the upper right-hand corner, in our case, I think it was the left corner, and I think that's characteristic of a Mac. The default behavior is for the J-frame to be hidden and for the application to keep running. This makes sense when there are other tasks for the program to complete after the main frame is closed, especially if you're going to display additional frames, if you're reading data files or things of that nature. To change this behavior, you can tell a J-frame to set default close operation by using one of the following 4 values. So we can say J-frame exit on close. It exits the program when the J-frame is closed. Windows constant dispose on close closes the frame, disposes of the J-frame, and keeps running. Do nothing on close keeps the J-frame and continues running. In other words, it disables the close button. Or you can hide on close. We are going to start with just exit on close. So what we're going to do is we are going to write another program, and we're going to play with that. And we'll do that when you do the little assignment. It's a you try it assignment. You will have to exit on close. Now, the appearance of a J-frame is set by either Windows, or it's set by Linux, or it's set by Mac. Now, we're familiar with seeing the coffee cup icon for Java applications. The icons and buttons are known as window decorations. By default, window decorations are supplied by the operating system. However, you can request that Java's look and feel provide different decorations for a frame if you want to. So, optionally, you can set a J-frame's look and feel by using set default look and feel decorated. Honestly, I didn't see this do very much. This one shows an application that calls that method. And if we look at this one and we compare it to the first one where we didn't use that line, they do look different. But I'm not going to lie to you, when I did this on my Apple, I didn't really see any difference. So let's try it again. So I have that as true, unless I didn't look close enough. Yeah, see, I didn't see it look any different. So maybe if you have a Windows machine, it's going to look different to you. And that's fine. If it's not doing anything in your Mac, that's fine. Now, here's your first you do it assignment. Your first you do it assignment. If you look in my document, so after the first couple frames, I snipped them in there. There's this video you can watch too, but here's your first assignment. So you're doing 14-2A, you do it, pages 2 through 5. All right, so you're just going to start a program from scratch. It reminds you to import the JavaX swing, tells you what to name it. And within it, this is what you're going to make. You're going to make a new frame called A frame. This time you're going to use some constants to determine the size. This is nice to do because then if you use these, if you do relative window sizes in other places of the program, you can refer to that constant, and then if you decide to change it later, you only have to change it in one spot. You're going to set the size of your frame and you're going to make it visible. Compile and run, and it should look like this. Play around with the maximize and restore buttons, and then play with the close button. Now here's the part that's going to be a little tricky. The J frame disappears or hides. The default behavior of a J frame is simply to hide when the user clicks the close button, not to end the program. To end the program and return control to the command line, click the command prompt, then Control C. So in Chapter 6, you learn to press Control C to stop the program. Now you're going to end an application with a J frame close. So within the class that you just wrote, you're going to make a duplicate called J demo frame that closes, and you're going to add this line of code in. Actually, I don't even want you to do that. I want you to just add this line to your program. So you're going to add that line to this code. So that when you run it, so I have that in here. So I want to show you the difference. When I run this first one, there's my, my program's running, waiting for something to happen. I close it, the program is still running technically. It hasn't been ended when I hit the X. So I'm going to end that one. But now here's the You Do It program where I've added that line of code. So now when I run it, now when I close it, you're going to see the program actually end because I've added the command that the default close operation to exit the frame when we close, okay? So I'm going to go ahead and end this first video, and then I'm going to start a second video for the next part of the lesson. All right, so next up is we're going to learn how to use something called JLabel. So this is a label or just text that you're going to put in the GUI. It's an uneditable component that most often is used to provide information to the user. So it is a built-in Java Swing class that allows you to create a label that you might display in the J frame. So here's the inheritance structure again. So you see that JLabel is a child of component, J component, which is a child of container, component, and object. So just like with the J frame, JLabel has a bunch of different constructors. You can create a label that's empty, creates a label instance with no image, and an empty string for the title. You can use an icon. You can use an icon and then ask it to align horizontally. You can create a label with text. You can create a label that has text and icon and has horizontal alignment, or just text and horizontal alignment. So you have a lot of options. So the syntax for a J label is you create a J label object, you give it a name, and you say is a new J label. So we're going to use the one that's just taking string. So we're just going to be basically writing text in the frame. So good day. Now, how do you add that? You add the label, which we are calling greeting, to the frame by using an add method that's available for JFrame objects. So from our previous program, we named our frame A frame. So we're going to say A frame add greeting. So we're going to create this program here. So you're going to see, patterns. We always use this import. I'm using constant to set the width and height. I create my J frame. I set its size. I set visible to true. I set default close operation, and now here I'm creating my greeting J label that says good day, and then I add it to the frame. So when I run the frame, it should do this. So you're going to code that. And now I'm going to comment some stuff out. No, here it is, right here. I'm going to comment this one out, okay? So now you should see what they had in the screen. Now here's the thing. Oh man, I don't see it. You can pull it down if you need to, and it is present. So I'm going to close it again. See how the program does end because I have that set default close operation on exit. Now, the counterpart to add is the remove method. The following statement removes a greeting from the frame if you want. typically we'll pretty much add greetings, and then if we want the frame to change, very often we just recreate or repaint the frame. If you add or remove a component from a container after it has been made visible, you also should call invalidate, validate, and repaint, so you will not see the results. Okay, if you add or remove a component, you do not have to repaint if you later alter the component by changing its text, and we'll see that in a bit. Now, we can change the text in a J label by using a method called set text. For example, the following code changes the value displayed in greeting J label. And I want to do that right now. So I'm going to go back here, and I want you to watch what happens. So the original program stops right here where we've added the greeting. And then I go to the greeting J label, and then I say set text, did it change? Now watch what happens. When I run this, all I see is did it change? So what you have to imagine is what's going on here is that this J label good day is getting overwritten by the second where we set the text. So we added the greeting and then we changed what the text says. So I can't really move it because it's all one greeting that has essentially been changed. So I do want you to try that and make sure you understand that. And I'm going to close. All right. Now, font. You like to have the ability to change fonts because a lot of you have preferred fonts, and sometimes you want to italicize or bold or change the weight of the text or the label that's being displayed in your GUI application. So we have the ability to change fonts in GUI components. A font requires a size, a weight, and a style of typeface. And Java provides you with a font class from which you can create an object that holds typeface and size information. Set font requires a font object argument, and then to construct a font object, you need 3 pieces of information. The typeface argument, which is kind of like, what is the font? And there's not a lot to choose from. You can use Arial, Century, monospaced, and Times New Roman. The style is either just going to be plain font or font that's bold or font that's italics. And then the size is referred to as the point size argument. It represents one integer value represents 1/72 of an inch. Printed text is commonly 12 point. A headline might be 30 points. So to make a font, so let's say we want to apply a font to a J label. To create the font, we say font, headline font is a new font. You put the typeface in quotations. You specify, if it's plain, bold, or italic, and then you specify the size. Now recall in our previous program, we had created a J label and there was a greeting. Now we can apply this font to the greeting that we created, and I'll remind you that was the J label greeting is a new J label. We can apply this font that we've created to the greeting message on the J label by saying set font, headline font. So now we're going to replicate this program here. Now, this is really important. When you start playing with font, now you have an additional import statement. You have to use this AWT import statement. It's Java AWT.star, because that's where the font class resides, okay? So, we're continuing to build upon our programs every time. We create our constants, and here's our font. We create our frame. This time we're calling it the 4th frame. We set the size, we make it visible. We set default close operation. We create the greeting. Now, this is where we're going to apply the font. So 36 is going to be pretty big, and then we add it to the frame. So I want you to replicate that. Oh, wrong one. And I want to run that now. Okay. And I'm going to comment out some of this other stuff because we're going to get to this in a minute. So what did we do here? All right, we definitely, okay, we added to the frame. We want the headline font. And I'm going to comment out this other font here. All right. So when we run this, we should see the message, good day. We're going to pull this down. And here's good day. This is monospace. And it's bolded. And it's in 36-point font. And I have JFrame exit on close. So my program ends. All right. Now, if you don't want to create a font object like we did in here, right there, you can just set the font by creating the font object right inside of set font, and you should be pretty comfortable with doing that. Now, you have created the headline font, and you can also create another font, text body font. And I can't remember if I did that in here. Oh, yes, we are going to do, let's see what my notes say. Okay, this was the code to shortcut the font creating process. And then in this last step, derived font. Oh, this is kind of interesting. And I do not believe we are there yet. Oh yeah, we are. It's where we are right now. Now, there's this other command called derive font. So you can create another font and notice how this is all tied together. We're going to derive a font from the headline font. So notice the arguments that are here. You're not telling it that it's Arial. It knows it's Arial because we're using the headline font object. And then we're calling derive font. So text body font will be Arial, plain, and size 14, so much smaller. And that's what I'm showing here. Now, I've created it, but I'm not doing anything with it. I'm not applying it to any other label or greeting. We'll go on and do that in the next step. But there's something important you have to learn before we start adding other components. And that's what the next section is about. When you want to add multiple components to a JFrame or other container, you need to provide instructions for the layout of the components, how they're going to appear in the GUI, in the frame. So we are going to create JFrame 5. And initially, we're going to do this the wrong way, but let's see what's in here. So I've got my constants for the size of the frame, the name of the frame. I set the size, I make it visible, I set default close operation, and I actually end up creating 2 different J labels, greeting and greeting 2. So you would think intuitively that all you would have to do is add the first greeting and then add the second greeting to the J frame. But if I try to do that, what ends up happening is only the second one shows up. So let me see if, yes, okay, so I've coded that in here and I want you to do that. My greetings are slightly different. My greetings are Kimberly A. Shaver and AP Computer Science instructor. Now, I have a little typo here. I should have said a frame add greeting 1. I'm not sure how that happened, but so just like we saw, it's only well, let's run it. I'm adding 2 greetings, greeting 1 and greeting 2. But when I check the display, it's only the second greeting that I see. And for this example, I did actually use a couple different fonts along the way just because I want it to be fancy and cool. So this is where the layout manager comes in. If you add more than one J label to a frame, only the last one is visible. To fix this, you need to use a layout manager that controls component positioning in the user interface environment class that provides layout, and it's called border layout. If you use border layout and do not specify a region to place a component, all components are placed in the same region and overlap. Now, flow managers place components in rows, and this is really what we want to use, avoiding this overlap problem. This class is called flow layout. You use constants to control horizontal positioning if you need to. So flow layout left, flow layout right, flow layout center. You have the default is centered if not specified. You will have to create a flow layout object. We're going to probably call it flow. And there'll be a new method called set layout that we will use, and we will apply that to the A-frame. So I'm going to go back through. So what we just talked about is what's in the text, and this is J-frame 6. This is where, so we're going to basically take J-frame 5, and we are going to add this line of code, which does both things in one step. It creates the flow layout manager, and then it sets the layout of the A-frame. So that's what you're going to see in here. Okay, although, all right, so now when I run this, the greetings will be separate. You'll be able to see them. They will appear in 2 different rows, which is definitely makes more sense. So I'm going to pull this down again so you can see. Let me move this. Okay, so you have the different items. You have the different items listed there. And let me close that, and we exit on close. So I want you to play around with that. Now, other layout managers allow you to position components in a container more precisely. The examples in this chapter will use flow layout because it's the easiest of the layout managers to use. There is a video. I didn't include it. I might circle back and do that later. But let's continue on. Now, so now we're going to start looking at J-frame classes and talking about inheritance and how we're going to separate the running of our frames from a class that controls a specific frame elements. So you can instantiate a simple J-frame object within an application's main method or with any other method of any class you write. Alternately, you can create your own class that descends from the J-frame class. The advantage of creating a child class of J-frame is that you can set the J-frame's properties within your object's constructor. Then, when you create your J-frame child object, it automatically is endowed with the features you have specified, such as the title, size, and default close operation. So you know how to create a child because you know about inheritance and using the keyword extends. You also know that you can call the parent class constructor by using the keyword super, and that when you call super, the call must be the first statement in the constructor. So for example, the J-frame class extends J-frame. Let's take a look. So we are creating our own class of frame called JMyFrame. It extends frame. Instance data at the top are my constants. Here is my constructor. The first thing I'm going to do is call super my frame because the J-frame constructor that had a single string parameter was used. We're going to set the size. We're going to set visible and we're going to make it close. Now, um, in order for us to test our class, we're going to create a tester program. So I'm going to create two different JMyFrame objects, myFrame and mySecondFrame. When you execute the application, the two JMyFrame objects are displayed with the second on top of the first, but you can actually grab them and move them around. So I'm going to open JMyFrame and create two JMyFrame objects. So I'm going to go back. I have this in here, JMyFrame. Okay, so here's my my class that I've created, which is a child of JFrame. And what was it called? Create two JMyFrame objects. Create two JMyFrame objects. All right. So let's run that. Okay, and again, like it said, the second frame goes right on top of the first frame. So they look the same, but there is actually two different frames there. And if you pull them down, I think we put a label in there, didn't we? Or did we not? Oh, I guess maybe we didn't. So I'm going to close those and end the program. All right. Okay, so we did. You can use something called the set bounds method with one of the JMyFrame objects that produces the output in figure 1418 so that you don't have to move one JFrame object to view the other. You exit the application when you hit the close. And I think I actually tried to do that. So the set bounds method, you specify an XY coordinate where you want the frame to start, and then its width and its height. So it allows you to offset frames or components added to frames. So what I chose to do, I'm going to take this out. So I'm taking my second frame and I'm moving it over to start in upper left-hand corner location 50-50, and this will be the width and the height. So now when I run this program, I definitely see both of the frames instead of how it happened the first time where they were lying on top of each other. Isn't that fun? All right. All right, now the good stuff. To me, this is really the good stuff. So now we're gonna learn how to add text fields that we can type in and buttons we can click to a JFrame. Then the second half of the chapter is going to be on getting our program to react when we click a button and type in a J text field. So we're going to start by adding a text field. So this is a component in which a user can type a single line of text data. And if we look at the hierarchy and scroll down, you can see that JText field is a child of JText component, which is a child of J component, and so on. So just like with the J frame and the J labels, we have multiple constructors, one that takes no parameters, one that takes an integer, which constructs an empty JText field with a certain number of columns, a JText field that actually is pre-populated with some text, or a JText field that's pre-populated with some text, and then you've also specified how big the text field is that you're going to type in. So we can create a text field that's 10 characters long, and then we would add it to our frame. So it's called response. We're going to add that. The number of characters JText field can display depends on the font being used and the actual characters type. So in most fonts, W is wider than I. So a JText field of size 10 using the Arial font can display 24 I characters, but only 8 W characters. The only font to use to avoid that is monospace because they're all the same width. Several other methods are available for JText field. The setText method allows you to change the text in a JText field or other component, because we've actually seen that before with the J label. After a user has entered text in a JText field, you can clear it out with a statement such as the following. So you set the text to nothing. You can also get the text and store it in a string, and this turns out to be very useful and will be useful later on. The JText field is editable by default. If you do not want the user to be able to enter data in a JText field, you can send a Boolean value to set editable method to change a JText field's editable status. Although I don't know why you would do that since you're creating a JText field to begin with. But if you want to give a user a limited number of chances to answer a question correctly, you can count the number of attempts. Like, let's say you made a quiz and they were entering an answer. You want to give them only 3 times. So if the number of attempts is over some limit, then you set the editable area in the JText field to false. And then you would probably take some other action like move on to the next question or so on. Now, the next fun thing that we're going to add are buttons, J buttons. There's what they're called. It's a component typically used to trigger an action or make a selection when the user clicks it. All right. A button is even easier to create than a text field. There are 5 button constructors: empty, something with an icon, a button labeled with text, a button with text and an icon, and this other button, action A, creates a button in which properties are taken from the action supplied. And action is a Java class. We're not going to use that though. So the format to create a button is the same. J button, ready J button is a new J button. This is the text that will display on the button. You can also use set text to change the text on the button. And you can also grab the text on the button and store it in a string. So, woo, that was a lot, but this is what we're going to do. We're going to create a class called JFrame with many components, and it extends the JFrame class. And you're going to create your constants at the top, your instance data. Here's your constructor. So again, I'm going to walk through this kind of slowly. So super is referring to the J frame. So that's what the text that's going to appear in the top of the frame. We're going to set the size. We're going to set the default close operation. We're going to create a J label called heading. This frame has many components. We're going to take the heading and set its font to Arial, bold, size 16. Then we're going to create another J label called name prompt. And it's going to say enter your name. Then right next to that, we're going to create a JText field called name field. And we're going to have that text field be 12 characters long. Then we're going to create a button, and that button's going to say click to continue. We're going to use the flow layout, set layout manager, so we can add multiple items to the frame, multiple components. And then we have to have individual adds to the J frame with many components. So we're going to add the heading. We're going to add the name prompt. We're going to add the name field, and we're going to add the button. So after you create that class, you need to create a tester program. So that tester program is going to be called component demo. So you create your J frame with many components object called frame. And notice this time in the tester program, this is where we made it visible. You could have done that in the other class, but for whatever reason, the user or the author chose to make it visible in the tester program. So let's take a look at what happens when we run JFrame with many components and component demo. Okay, so now I've got to find it. JFrame with many components. So all that stuff is in there. And here is component demo. All right, so this time we should see some labels, a text field, and a button. Here we go. This frame has too many components. Enter your name. Click to continue. And that's nice. Now I can close it and the program ends. Well, the next thing we really want to do though is we want to be able to have our program react when we enter data, when we click buttons and things of that nature. So to end this lesson, you're going to do You Do It. You are going to follow these instructions. You're going to create a different program that extends the J-frame class with a specified label, text field, and button. Then you are going to, in the class, here's your constructor. You're going to set up the frame, default close, set the layout, and add those things. You're going to call it J-frame with components Java. Make sure you don't have any problems. It says, next write an application that creates a new J-frame with components named A-frame, sizes it using set size, then sets its visible property to true. So read this carefully. You're setting the size of it in the tester program. Go ahead and save it and run it. When you run it, this is what we should see. Click the J button, okay. It acts like a button should. That is, it appears to be pressed when you click it, but nothing happens because you have not written instructions for the button clicks to execute. And then you close the application. All right, so that is the end of the lesson. So you are going to turn in a folder with all the assignments. And then you are also going to turn in this one and this one as well. So I'm going to go ahead and end this lesson.